This morning, I made a written statement to this House announcing my decision to give the go-ahead to high-speed tubing.
Bebout acquired Findmere Woods because it's just a gem in the countryside. It's part of a network of ancient woodlands that make up the ancient hunting forest of Burnwood. Like most of our clay-based woodlands in this area, it has a fabulous ground flora that comes to the fore in spring. So the flowers on the ground come up and we get that lovely display of colour before the leaves come onto the trees.
Well, ancient woods are such a real diverse hotspot. I mean, they're fantastic for wildlife. Because they've been there for so long, they've really had a chance to develop into a complex habitat and ecosystem that supports a really wide variety of birds, mammals, invertebrates. The butterfly populations at Findmere are fantastic, but also the ground flora.
Probably my two most favourite places at the moment are the top of the wood, the ancient bit of wood that hasn't been touched for years and years and years. So it's very old and that's beautiful up there. My other favourite place is the Drovers Track that the volunteer work party are clearing at the moment. I just think it's a very magical place as we're discovering something very old.
I think there are a number of things about it that really attract me. I mean, we've done some work behind this hedge here. We did quite a lot of work last winter, cutting back some old trees and scrub and stuff, and we've exposed an old drover's path. And when we cut everything down, there was absolutely nothing there, nothing. And now there's all kinds of grasses and plants and flowers and things all coming up, which is just fantastic. And it's doing things like that is, you know, really sort of, I suppose, gets my imagination going and makes you realise how special places like this are.
Findmere Woods provides for a whole host of different species. The ones we see most visibly are the flowers. So in spring our woodlands are vibrant. We get the bluebells, we get a whole range of different species that come up. But there's an awful lot of wildlife we don't see just as easily. Obviously there are lots of insects associated with ancient woodlands, particularly where we've got big mature trees, especially if they've been allowed to decay and the deadwood to stand there. At night there are bats, and the bat community in Burnwood Forest, where Findmere Woods is, turns out to be one of the best in the country. We've got an amazing range of species in one area that we're only just starting to become aware of.
Findmere is an incredibly good site for bats in general, but it's one of very few sites where Bechstein's bats are resident, one of the very rarest mammals in the whole of the UK, and we're lucky enough to have a population of them living in Findmere Wood.
Calvert Jubilee, by lucky chance really, provides a whole different range of habitats that are important for different types of species. So the lake itself is very deep. That means in a very hard winter the water tends not to freeze as rapidly as it does on other gravel pits in the surrounding area. So in a hard winter we find that the bird life particularly finds the water at Calvert very important. So we get large complexes of large communities of birds appear at the nature reserve simply because they haven't got anywhere else to go. Equally, the mixture of habitats around the edges are really important. So we get bittern, for instance, in winter coming here because there's cover and shelter for them. The hedges form part of a network of hedges in this part of the world that are really important, particularly for hair streak butterflies, which have a stronghold in this part of the countryside. And then the grasslands, there are bits of grassland that have been here for an awfully long time, which again provide a whole variety of flowers and then insects and then the other species that live off them. So it really is important for a whole different variety of things in different ways.
The fact that it's very close to where I live, but it's full of untouched wildlife. And so when I do come, I bring my 2 young boys and they actually experience wildlife that you just don't normally see. And that's really one of the reasons we moved to the area about 10 years ago, because it's just untouched, it's beautiful. And actually, Calvert is one of the, is one of the areas in Buckinghamshire with the darkest skies at night as well. And of course with HS2 coming, that's under threat as well.
It's like, to me, I just think of HS2 coming up here, and it's like a sort of railway Berlin Wall. It's just cutting all the roots off that everything uses and just splitting sides from sides. It's just, I just don't understand the logic of it at all. If you persuaded me somehow that it was a thing that we desperately needed, then I suppose you'd have to kind of grudgingly admit that it would need to be done. But I can't see the logic of it or the need for it. So consequently, I just feel, to me, that it's like a kind of vandalism, if you like.
There will be impacts as well for turtle doves we're worried about. Turtle doves have been having an awful time nationally and they have been hanging around at Calvert in the last few years and used to breed in the area where High Speed 2 will come through. So there's a particular concern about, again, a particularly rare species. Our worry about Calvert is actually much more about the way people are able to use the site. High Speed 2 is going to change the whole feel of the nature reserve quite considerably. What's currently a relatively tranquil site will have a very different feel to it. Although the line will be partially buried, be below ground height as it comes through some of the nature reserve, it has to be fenced off, the noise will be quite considerable, and the way the train connects to the electricity supply means that you'll get noise constantly as it's going backwards and forwards. So people will no longer be able to come to what's a tranquil site in the countryside, simply to be able to enjoy the birds quietly in the way that they've been able to for years.
I think the construction of HS2 is really quite difficult because I don't think any of us can really know quite what impact that's going to have. My sense is that it'll have a major impact because for a considerable period of time, in fact probably the impact will be greater than the final finished product.
The development of HS2, the actual construction phase of it, is going to be like just putting the Grand Canyon through the middle of this landscape, and it's important to remember that wildlife uses a much larger, all of these species use a range of areas and of habitats, and they won't stay confined to fine mere wood, for example. A great example are the Bechstein bats that we've mentioned. They have their maternity roost in fine mere, so they breed there, but they actually feed elsewhere in other woods. Currently they use the existing railway line to travel, so they fly up and down the hedgerows to get to these other woods to feed, and they can use these mature rows of hedgerows as a map, really, as highways to get around. When HS2 goes in, there won't be that route set up for them. It'll be a wide open space. They won't have that sonar to rely on to bounce signals off of, so it could cut them off from areas where they feed. So we could actually lose this population as their breeding roost is separated from their feeding areas. So it's really quite concerning.
I think the effects of HS2 are going to be different in different places. Certainly some reserves could be completely decimated. some sites of special scientific interest are likely to be irreparably damaged, and here in particular is the peace and quiet. And once the trains start running, that's what you'll hear here, because you can hear when they occasionally run a goods train on the track down the bottom, you can hear that. And the construction work itself bothers me. You've got 10 years or something of upheaval and construction, and God knows what will get destroyed in that process. And I understand they're going to do things to the car park here and goodness knows what. But I think here, the thing that everybody's most worried about is the bats.
I think HS2, when it's up and running, will have effect upon the nature, upon the fauna in this area, definitely. The noise is going to be a factor, even though there are measures to stop the noise coming from the railway across into the nature reserves and the communities. It's still going to be there. But it's just going to be this huge barrier, and supposedly there's going to be 14 trains an hour whizzing along it, and it's inevitably going to have an effect. It's going to stop animals and insects from crossing over it. There's going to be this huge barrier that they just can't get beyond.
When they built HS1, my understanding is that it was actually a policy decision that they would take the line that would cause the least environmental damage along the way, which is why the railway line follows the motorway. That has just gone out of the window here, and I don't understand why the rules that were and the policies that were put in place when they built HS1, if we're going to build a new railway, and I'm not convinced we need a new railway, but if we've got to have a new railway, why those principles should not apply here.
Well, I think it's devastating to the local community and the wildlife around here. In particular, if you look at not just here, but all of the areas around here, we're steeped in wildlife. We've got SSI woodland, we've got lots of ancient woodland. And to look at the route, it's almost as if HS2 has picked a route that impacts as many of those areas as they can. When you consider that, it's such a rural location, of all of the places to put a line, they choose that particular one with such devastation to the wildlife.
So BBOUT expects to have to interact with the high-speed 2 rail proposals for years, if not decades to come. I mean, it's going to become a permanent part of our countryside. Initially, we are working obviously to try and minimise the impacts on our nature reserve. There are effects, for instance, that change the way we'll be able to manage the site. So we need to make sure we can protect our own interests, if you like. Equally, we're trying to work with High Speed to promote more compensation for the habitats that are impacted. That's a very complicated business because providing compensation equally takes up somebody else's land. So there are deals to be struck or arrangements to be made where we hope that we'll be able to work with local landowners and with High Speed 2 themselves to make sure that there is proper compensation for those habitats that can be compensated for. Some habitats obviously you can't compensate for at all, and the loss of ancient woodland in the Chilterns, for instance, once that's gone, it's gone. High Speed 2 have committed to replanting in other areas, but it will never replace what was originally there. In the longer term, there may be a role for BBOUT in terms of managing some of those compensatory sites. We hope in most cases that it will fit into existing plans for other landowners and that they will take on the management of those areas. But there may be areas where we want to get involved because there are opportunities for particular wildlife that BBOUT can help support. And particularly, we've talked about the Bechstein's bat and the impact on the Bechstein's bat. We'll be wanting to work very closely with High Speed 2 to make sure that what compensation they put in place to help support those bat populations actually works. It's something we're really worried about. It's something we want to see work if it possibly can, and we will have to be part of that solution simply because our nature reserve lies on the part where High Speed 2 cuts through the bat's territories. In the longer run, obviously, HS2 will have a huge impact on visitors at Calvert Jubilee and some impact on visitors at Fine Mere, but it will be, as I say, part of the lives of those nature reserves forever.